Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome from all of us here at the Raja Ravi Verma Heritage Foundation. A warm welcome to all of us who have joined here on the Zoom platform and for all those watching live on Facebook. A welcome from the board, the trustees, and the family of Ravi Verma. This evening's talk, Preserving a Master Artist's Legacy by Deepti Sashidharan, is in continuation of the Foundation's efforts to throw more light on the various and significant and also crucial elements that are involved in documenting and restoring masterpieces. Many of us are aware who Deepti Sashidharan is, but to those who don't know her, let me introduce her. Deepti is an art historian and a curator, and her academic qualifications in museology provide a comprehensive approach to managing projects. She works on heritage and museum projects across India and with the government, private and corporate clients. Under Deepti's Eka Cultural Resource and Research that was established in 2009 and has executed several important projects, including several museums, exhibitions, and the creation of archives for those of the Kalakshetra in Chennai, City Palace in Udaipur, and Tata Trust in Mumbai. A Fulbright scholar, she teaches and lectures at several leading institutions. Over the last 5 years, we at the Foundation have taken it upon ourselves to document, restore, and preserve the works of Ravi Verma. We have been fortunate that several private collectors have come to us with masterpieces that have never been seen before, seeking documentation and restoration. The Foundation has then taken great care and have used these works, have ensured them, fine art rated them, and sent them to highly qualified and important conservationists for the restoration process. After successful restoration, which sometimes stretches anywhere between 6 and 12 months, the paintings have been safely put back in the walls of the owner. I'm very proud and humbled to say, in equal measure, that all that we do with rigorous planning to make the execution of the restoration process happen, it is done for no cost at all. And the condition that which we return it in ensures that the painting will last for another 200 years at least. This is the legacy that we set out to achieve when we established the Foundation in 2015. And for that to happen, we have impressed upon the private collectors on the guidelines and the ideal conditions in which they are to be preserving their artworks. So it's not just pride in owning a priceless painting, it's also the fact that they have preserved it and restored it to its original condition. As we embarked on this journey, we realized how much collectors and owners appreciated the Foundation's efforts in bringing back life to masterpieces that were created by India's greatest artist, Ravi Verma. It's a matter of joy, therefore, to them as well as to us. Most importantly, the Foundation, by virtue of its association with these private collectors, has ensured longevity and livingness of the artists through these works. This not just highlights the importance of today's evening's talk, but it becomes very pertinent for us to glean crucial knowledge from someone as highly qualified as Deepti. By extension, her views, which also become guidelines for us and a source point for the Foundation, as she talks about several of her own projects, including Raja Ravi Verma and how to preserve his legacy. So thank you once again for attending. I welcome everybody and I hand it over to you now, Deepti. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitanjali. A very warm good evening to all of you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. A heartfelt thank you to the Raja Ravi Verma Foundation and to the board, the trust, and the family members of Ravi Verma. It's fantastic to hear of the work you're doing, Gitanjali, and that how all of you have come together to strive to put together a legacy that's well over a century old now. And I'm also thankful both to you and to Archana for hand-holding me through till this point in time. When the Raja Ravi Verma Foundation approached me, I was delighted with an abiding interest in 19th century history and something that I'm very fond of. I was familiar with Raja Ravi Verma, but I was certainly not a specialist. So when we discussed and thought about how we could explore another aspect of his legacy, I said, why not the legacy itself? This is what I do, work with institutions and heritage institutions, preserving legacies of objects, of people, and of their stories. And I thought this would be a fantastic initiative to talk about how we could preserve the legacy of a man who was so important, and more importantly, a person who's regarded as a master artist. So thank you to all of you who've joined us this evening, both here on Zoom as well as on Facebook. And my talk today will look at the artist. I'm just going to pull up my screen. Archana, will you confirm that you can see the screen?
Not yet, Deepti. You could just share now, please.
Yeah.
Yes, I can see it. Yes. Please, thank you.
Yes. Scholars, custodians, owners, students, and enthusiasts have enjoyed and marveled at the art by Raja Ravi Verma. But there are very few who realize that this is a shared and collective legacy to look after. My talk today will look at the artist and his expansive legacy and how various agencies can contribute to a collaborative effort. Indeed, how each one of you listening to this talk can help look after the legacy of a master artist is something that we are going to explore together. Raja Ravi Verma Koil Tamburan was born in April 1848 in the Royal Kilimanur Palace, a short distance from modern-day Thiruvananthapuram, the eldest of 3 siblings into a family that had close matrimonial alliances over generations with the ruling royal family of the Kingdom of Travancore. His brother Raja Verma, 12 years younger, also later an artist, was his most devoted ally, and the diaries he maintained for and of his brother are today one of the most intimate peeps into his life. Raja Ravi Verma is widely regarded as the pioneer of modern art in the Indian subcontinent. As an artist, his trademark style became the portrait painting, regal portrait painting that was both rich and realistic. By the time he was creating these works, photography was well established and equally in demand, but his detailed, color, suffused paintings were sought after by wealthy clients, both royals and elite business families of the time. In his lifetime, Verma is believed to have created close to 2,000 paintings, and his artworks had such mass appeal and charm that it was suggested he take them to an even wider audience. He then chose to convert his paintings into oleographs, or mass-produced chromolithographed prints, and the demand for these was indeed phenomenal. Representations of his art, especially the Puranic themes, would go to homes across the country and become the very perception of how we imagine our gods. Today, Ravi Verma's collections can be found at national institutions like the NGMA in Delhi, the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad, the Sri Chitra Art Gallery in Trivandrum under the government of Kerala, a must-see for all Ravi Verma art lovers, holds the largest number of paintings done by him. The holdings at the private residence Lakshmi Vilas Palace, Vadodara, and the public Fateh Singh Museum together hold approximately 42 paintings belonging to the artist, making it the largest outside Kerala. Other museums like the Government Museum Chennai and the KNMA in Delhi also own works by the artist. As to the private erstwhile royal families and collections at Udaipur, Mysore, Pudukkottai, etc. The oleographs that were produced in thousands are spread across museum and private collections as well as homes across the world. So it is for this staggering legacy and pioneering spirit that establishes Ravi Varma as a master artist. It's easy to lose focus that we're talking about a man who brought a consistent originality that was his own. He dedicated his entire life to his art. I'm constantly amazed at how much he traveled, for example, writing to prospective clients, seeking audiences, which was never easy because he chose audiences with royals, requesting for positive letters of introduction, beseeching patrons, and always looking to further his art. His art was also groundbreaking, and his mastery over his preferred medium, which was oil on canvas, was absolute. Varma's talented virtuosity propelled him from recognition to recognition, and his ability to inspire ensuing generations is proof of his talent. Before we plunge in, I'd like to look at what constitutes an artist's legacy. And we think of artist legacies as, the sum of the artworks that were produced in his lifetime. Not so. An artist's legacy is both tangible and intangible. And in the tangible realm, I've listed what, at least for this artist, outlines the items that we constitute as living material heritage. These are artworks, which are paintings, sketches, and prints, which is what we most commonly think of when we think of as an artist's legacy. But equally important are the archives, the ephemera, personal papers, diaries, in this case maintained by his younger brother, who planned to publish them, but it never came to fruition. And nonetheless, it is a very informative insight into his life. Special collections of material, any remnants of canvases, paints, stretchers, easels, his personal library of books, periodicals, exhibition catalogs, artist books, and I'll come back to that in a bit. And finally, of course, coming into our digital realm, the online catalogs and e-databases that connect far-flung parts of his legacy on one platform. So when it comes to preserving the legacy of a master artist, we cannot ignore the material references of influences, inspirations, books, and other tangible material available to him. Ravi Varma's stupendous journey crisscrossing palaces, patronage, art, artists, and fame was no different. But I'm going to pick a few examples and urge you to look at an artist who was very much a global citizen of his times. While the exquisite beauty of Ravi Varma's works is undeniable, Varma was also very keenly aware of the world and its happenings and desirous of making a mark internationally. Ramaswamy Naidu, Nee Naikar, was a practicing artist who preceded Varma at the Travancore Royal Court as an artist, and the two did not get along. But Varma was clearly inspired by his senior. Varma's first major award was the Governor's Gold Medal presented at the Madras Fine Arts Society of 1873 and titled Nair Lady Adorning Her Hair. Varma was accepted in the service of the ruler of Travancore, both because he was an aristocrat and very talented, but he had not traveled much till this point in his life. And so his work was still very much influenced by what he could access in the palace. You can see in the slide before you the same themes and the noticeable realism in both paintings. Ramaswamy Naidu was also talented, but he lived a generation before Varma. And the same year that Varma got recognition in Madras, Naidu, his senior, was recognized at the Vienna Universal Exhibition in 1973. Naidu had bridged the gap of taking Indian native themes and presenting them with Western oil painting. This must have been quite remarkable, and one can see how Raja Ravi Varma continued to acknowledge this early influence even 20 years later. So on the right, you can see his very iconic and famous photograph, There Comes Papa. And on the left, a painting by his senior Naidu. And the theme of the mother and child was a popular one and easily understood across audiences. And I think this was something that Varma continued to hone throughout his artistic career. As a palace resident, Varma also had access to a library stocked with art magazines, art books, and very many photographs. Photographs were critical for him as he had often used them for preparatory sketches and later for details to fill in. Varma's trip to Hyderabad to paint the Nizam of Hyderabad at the turn of the century is documented. Unfortunately, he could not receive an audience at the court of the Nizam, but he was presumably given this beautiful toned platinum print, taken by the Nizam, taken off the Nizam, in Johnston and Hoffman Studios in Calcutta in 1899. It is this photograph that he turned into a painting, only changing minor details and deepening the perspective instead to play and create a multi-hued and beautiful sky. Nonetheless, the painting was never bought. The Nizam didn't care for it, leaving Varma no choice but to sell it for a loss and leave Hyderabad for another destination. I particularly love this painting. This was one of the paintings that Ravi Varma took to the Chicago Exposition in 1893. And sharing space with him so far away in his pavilion were the works of the notable photographer Lala Deen Dayal. This painting references the private areas of the emperor, the Khas Mahal inside the Red Fort or Lal Killa, built in the 1640s by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. This interior view shows a wall richly decorated with inlaid floral pietra dura work and inset with pierced marble screens. The semicircular panel of the screen depicts a crescent moon, stars, and the scales of the Justice, the latter used as a regal emblem. The lower section is carved in floral and lattice work design, and the screen is suspended over a central water channel known as the Nahr-e-Bishisht, or the Stream of Paradise, that passes in a straight line through the palace apartments. And this Oriental theme was very popular even as a photograph because portfolios were made by Deen Dayal, and of course he was also showing similar photographs internationally. The beauty of these architectural spaces was deeply envied in Europe and elsewhere, and photographs were popular souvenirs. But what's interesting for me in this photograph is that Varma, again, perhaps clearly had access to the photograph, and I couldn't resist doing this little inset where you can see how he has taken the background. In all probability, the models in front are also inspired by some other theme, which I'm not aware of. But you can see how he uses photographs and uses them for painting in realistic details in his works. Here's another example where Varma dips into contemporary lithographs, both for inspiration and to ensure that he gets the iconography correct for a commissioned portrait of Saint Gonzalo Garcia. Saint Garcia was an Indian Portuguese missionary born in Bassein, now Vasai, in Bombay. He turned merchant and was later anointed as a saint. He looks at the available visual imagery of other saints in India, notably the famous Saint Francis Xavier, and achieves a Christian saintly expression, the eyes turned upwards, hand holding a missionary cross, and another hand held to his chest. The Christian halo, Franciscan robes, everything completes a commission, which I think could pass muster in any European church. And for me, Varma's astuteness in being both Indian and global is something that turns up again and again. It's a trait, I think, that he shared with other contemporary notables like J.N. Tata, and it's what makes his work and lifetime relevant. In this artwork, titled Sita in Ashoka Vanam, a scene from the epic Ramayana, he goes to great lengths to show the dark-skinned women of Ravana's Lanka. As an artist, he would have turned to available material. And remember, this is a time the cities of India flooded with postcards, like the one you see in the center. This was a trend of the time. I mean, in today's time, we wouldn't see why it was important, but these reclining odalisks and oriental beauties, as they were called, this is a Rhodia girl from Ceylon. And I've also juxtaposed it with another great painter and painting of the time, that's Gauguin's, one of his Tahitian subjects. And this obsession for looking at exotic peoples and other beauty paradigms was very much prevalent at the time. And I find it fascinating that, Varma incorporates it into a painting, because if you look at just this one painting, there is so much that is going on here. Sita is wearing a Maharashtrian sari. The imaging of her women guards is again based on the sort of photographic exercises that were happening in South India at the time, where the jewelry is of the South Indian women and so on. And I think it's a fascinating way in which he was bringing these quiet elements together. Varma was also interested in historical artworks that were used extensively in preparatory sketches. For a portrait of Rana Amar Singh commissioned by the Maharana of Mewar, he dipped into the palace archives of miniature painting. The City Palace Museum in Udaipur has some of the finest holdings of this form of art. And Varma studied in detail the imagery and detailing, and as you can see, quite impressively translated them into a scale that was significantly larger. I could go on about it, but I think the comparison speaks for itself, and it's really quite fascinating how he, references these idioms that I suppose were also acceptable to a royal patron. If a king had king's bar of excellence were miniature paintings that were so beautiful, it was but natural that Varma would very astutely lean into the same kind of idioms while executing them as a large canvas, oil on canvas. Varma's foray into oleographs around this time, where he collaborated with German technologist Schleiser to take both his more famous paintings of gods and goddesses, as well as other Puranic themes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, catapulted his art into the homes of the people of India. Art historians have credited this ability to mass produce prints of popular religious icons as a major force in unifying visual culture. In the half century after Ravi Varma's demise, his prints continued to inspire popular culture across India. And just by the familiarity of what you see in front of you, you've seen something like this before. On the far left is a Padmini titled The Lotus Lady, which I think looks very, very much like Botticelli's Venus. And on the extreme right, you see an oleograph by M.V. Dhurandhar, who came after him, but you can see how the kind of referencing and visual imagery continues. Ravi Varma's visualizations were so revolutionary that many of us do not even realize that it is his vision we see in our towns and cities and in statues and idols we revere and we respect. So if you see here, you've got the 8th century philosopher and theologian Adi Shankaracharya, whom nobody knows how he looked like because he lived in the 8th century. And then we have the oleograph that was immensely popular. And to this day, and I've deliberately chosen this sculpture that is from a temple far away in Santa Cruz, California, where you see that right down to the gesture of the hands, everything continues to be replicated as the artist had imagined it for his oleograph. Here's another example. And this is the valiant 16th century Maharana of Mewar, Udaipur, who traumatized the Mughals. And he was also immortalized by Ravi Varma. And every memorial statue of him today is based on this famous painting. I must add here that the Ravi Varma and his brother Raja Varma stayed in Udaipur as royal guests for 3.5 months. And their sketches documented everything from local costume to armor, weapons to miniature paintings in the royal collection as studies for their final painting. Even the unusual sword, which you see, it's a double-hilted sword, is based on a documented visit he made in 1901 to the local museum to study the sword that belonged to Maharana Pratap. And on the right, you see is his cenotaph today, where the sculpture of Maharana Pratap is an exact identical 3D version of the painting. So you will begin to understand now with these few examples that I've given that an artist's legacy is not the sum total of the collation of just their artworks. In India today, we need platforms where we can present their journey and contemporary references and make available to the coming generations a broad spectrum of these paths really and avenues that can be taken further both for education as well as for scholarship. I wanted to also pause and point out the typical agencies on whom the onus of preservation of a legacy usually rests. These are usually, for a master artist, the government. The Government of India, through its Citizens Charter for 2019, which falls under the Ministry of Culture, mandates, and I quote, protection, development, and promotion of both tangible and intangible heritage and knowledge heritage by enforcing preservation and conservation laws and policies to create strong bonds between citizens and the cultural heritage of India. So the government identifies cultural personalities that are the most important, and in the interests of the nation and in laws like the Antiquities and Art Treasures Act of 1972 and later ordinances pin down the 9 master artists, including Raja Ravi Verma, whose arts are non-exportable. Works outside the country before 1972, of course, are already exempt. So you can understand where the government can play a very pivotal role in bringing together the materials in terms of resources that matter. The artist estate or family. Now, many artists are meticulously organized with their studios, the newer artists, and most talented young artists realize that their studio archives, if organized, also appreciate in value. Ravi Verma's studio materials as lithographs and oleographs, worthless as art in his time, are today collector's items. In the case of Ravi Verma, the popularity has returned only in the recent decades and has flowed backwards in efforts to celebrate his life. I also want to briefly touch upon the other agencies, which are art galleries, collectors, investment. These are all largely in the commercial space. Auction houses, art dealers, they too have a role to play because very often it is in their custody that a painting first emerges or is brought. And but typically, if guidelines are set by the first 2 agencies, those are the sort of guidelines that they look at. And then finally, of course, you have art insurance companies and nonprofit organizations, which also do fantastic work because they do it in a very technical, no-nonsense manner with a clear agenda defined. And since a master artist's legacy is both tangible and intangible, I want to just highlight 1 or 2 things. And the first is that the person responsible for preserving and archiving the legacy is often not an artist themselves, which means that they don't have an understanding of what it is that they're dealing with. More often than not, the responsibility falls on the family, which dovetails into what I just said, that they may not actually know how to look after something that is so valuable or fragile. Studio archives often include more than art. And these include location and accession registers, easels, paint brushes. So the question again falls back on how do we and what do we do with all of this? Provenance, which is something that all of these bullet points would nod their head to, is absolutely critical. And related to provenance is documentation, which is what I'm going to come to. And finally, a note on art versus the archival material. Remember that art in terms of an oil on canvas is usually one. There will only be one artwork. But when it comes to speaking about prints or oleographs, for example, there is no such thing as an original print and a fake print. Prints were multiples, and so therefore either we regard all of them as originals or we look at all of them as multiple copies or prints, which is how they are regarded as. Now that I've established my case for how significant and how important and how diverse a legacy of a master artist is, I want to move on to why preservation is important and why documentation is important and what role it can play. So the preservation, and these are just some guidelines that I want to share with the audience, is that we have to create a culture of sharing. When we are looking at the legacy of master artists, every drop contributed together brings and makes an ocean. There has to be meticulous documentation, which includes basic metadata, which is just technical information related to an object. What is its title? Do you have any proof of it? What are the measurements? What materials is it made of? Conservation documentation, very critical and ignored in our country. I'll come back to that. And visual media, which is usually the focus of all attention, because increasingly we tend to recognize, appreciate, accept, sometimes even buy things purely on the basis of visual media, which includes a host of processes today, including photography, videography, alternate processes of AR, VR, VFX, whatnot. And of course, in the center of that is something I also want to share is IPR image sharing. I'm going to come to that, and the use of technology. So I'm going to begin first with conservation. Now, as art deteriorates, as all organic art does at some point or the other, it becomes imperative to record its conservation history. Very little is done in India, and even less is made available in the public shared domain. Conservation documentation can be defined as the textual and visual documentation of the scientific study of the material components of an object. Think of it as a medical report, if you will, of the treatments done to an object and the essential information, which in turn helps researchers, curators, and conservators help care for it, increase the longevity, and establish authenticity of the object. In 1998, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, known as INTAC, in collaboration with NGMA, published Raja Ravi Verma Amrita Shergill Restored, one of the first major organized and public documentation publications. And these visuals will give you an idea of how helpful it is. My friend and colleague Giri, who's a very senior conservator, he did the stratigraphic and microchemical examination, and he shared this with me. And it took some time to understand what it was. But in the report that he shared, it and also published in the book, it notes that one of the major, and I quote, "A major problem in Ravi Verma paintings is the presence of improper previous restoration," unquote. In this particular painting that you see, the Veena player, the minor losses were filled in with gesso, and then large parts were overpainted. And this is just typical. I think my conservator friends who are listening will not be surprised. But the implications that it has is that if such a problem is known and shared, it helps both younger conservators be acquainted with the master artist's work, as well as it helps those of us who deal with it and are in the periphery of dealing with the artwork understand how paintings and how artworks react. And I just want to show this. I have seen this happen in museums all the time, but I wanted to share this with the audience that this is how conservators map paintings. And it's like a sketched X-ray of a painting, if you will. But with the help of a simple color coding, they create a visual map of the painting as they see it. And this is critical because it's almost like a thumbprint, it never lies. And it helps incredibly in establishing authenticity, provided it has been built up over a period of time for an art object. I'm going to show another. This is, of course, of an artwork called The Portrait of a Maharaja. This book is published, so you can look at it, but I wanted to share how a mapping of a fragile work of art, this is an oil on canvas, is done. A technical analysis is done, pigment analysis is done, and so on. Now this famous work of art, very well loved, this is the Sita Bhumi Pravesham, believed to be the painting presented by Sir Madhava Rao to the Maharaja Baroda, Sayaji Rao, that impressed him enough to invite the accomplished painter Ravi Verma to his court. Now, this painting shows a particularly dramatic moment from the Ramayana when Mother Earth swoops Sita downward home, even as a bewildered husband, the Lord Rama, looks dismayed, and the onlookers all around stand transfixed. The beauty of the painting is undeniable, but time had ravaged it. We know from conservation records, again available with INTAC, that the original wooden stretcher had deteriorated completely. A long strip from the top left went missing, probably due to fungus, and successive painters called in to restore the beauty completely altered it. The architecture, blue skies, and details of the texture of the cloth and jewelry you see now were lost. And the freshness and the vitality are only returned because of meticulous restoration by professional conservators. And I cannot stress the importance of this enough, because professional conservators as a group and in isolation always try to look at it from the point of view of the longevity of the object. They also ensure that they constantly campaign, and for us in the arts world, it's an unending struggle to get the best of equipment, cameras and brushes. Good painting restoration requires meticulous hands, skill, as well as materials. And while we are on the topic, in fact, I'd like to throw open the question to the audience, is that because restoration is such a specialist niche job, our public collections of all our master artists really suffer, because restoration work and conservation work is typically given in government style to what we call the tendering process, which I think all of you must be familiar with. But I think as our nation turns 75, it's about time to think about how, at least have an open conversation on how and who we entrust our aging art to. Our art pieces that we call the national pride and state treasures cannot be entrusted to the lowest tender of, or cost. That's something to think about. And so yes, conservators need your help. Next time you come across one, please do spend time with them. They are very eager to share their work, and I think it's something that all custodians and people who work with art, own art, should engage in. Moving on. Now, this is also something that is of, it's a much hotly, keenly debated topic, and I wanted to speak about this as well, is of IPR and image sharing. With the multiplicity of images available on digital media, all of the custodians of master artists in India face the problem of managing images. It's a unique and peculiar problem, and it assails museums, owners, foundations, and artist estates. All museums prefer high resolution images that can be magnified and linked to database information. For the rights holders, there is a perpetual worry that easy access will lead to unauthorized use, or worse, lack of credit. Therefore, it's important to join hands and find workable solution. We might perhaps consider the policies of Western museums that have adopted a policy to make high resolution images freely available. But nonetheless, the problem begins because there is no policy for most institutions. So I urge anyone who has a custodianship of a significant artwork to actually put their policy down in writing, and that's the first step. It certainly makes a coordinating agency's work easier to outline common ground. So if we have 15 private owners who own Ravi Varmas, and all 15 have their policy as it suits them, a coordinating agency or a foundation could actually begin the rather enormous task of finding common ground between all these 20 policies. But without that, we stand nowhere. So that's something that I wanted to share. I also, okay, so here I've just pulled together, just to show how complicated it is. You can have the same oleograph that is decorated in different ways, and it becomes a different object altogether. And how and who can share the image of artwork is therefore always problematic. And I wanted to share here what's happening at the cutting edge of the museum world. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with an artwork that has like a watermark that is absolutely, stamped across it. And these serve an important purpose, and they were brought in because people would pick up images from the internet and use them without credits, and use them recklessly, use them for printing, use them across for multiple purposes, and so on. Technology to the rescue. I am a huge advocate of using the tools that are available. Today, sophisticated watermarking technologies are available, And I'm citing two here. One is Digimark, which is basically a watermarking software which enables embedded copyright and contact information to be read via Digimark's enabled image editing applications, which is like Adobe Photoshop or Corel Photo Paint and Internet Explorer. I also wanted to share with you, in Bangalore earlier this year, we opened a museum of currency. And one of my takeaways when working with that is you cannot photocopy a currency note. I mean, just try it. And this is because every currency note comes with what I'm talking about. There's a sophisticated watermarking code that is in there so that when the scanner comes across a currency note, it just does not replicate. And so if you have a master artist, I'm certainly not propagating this for every, family photograph, but if you have an artist at the caliber of Ravi Varma and you have photographs that are limited in number, this is certainly something that we can think of, where clients can determine the copyright owner of the image. And at the same time, ordinary people can continue to look at an image. There's also something called an online image tracking. These are all patented names, which can actually crawl the web and reports back a subscriber's images as they are distributed and reported on websites. The British Museum, in fact, signed up with an agency called the Signum. They are specialized, again, digital watermarking people based out of Switzerland. They work with currency notes and passports and so on. But they have watermarked every digital image that goes online. And that goes online or leaves the museum. And in July 2004, that's almost 15 years ago now, 6 important cultural heritage projects became licensees with that kind of a program. So there are ways forward. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is collaboration. Using technology has made things fantastic, but again, there is hesitancy only because people don't know what is out there. And which is why events like these are fantastic, because I think it informs people and helps them understand what these things really are. I think to preserve the legacy of a master artist, building online scholar catalogs is absolutely critical. And publishing scholarly catalogs is an essential part of bringing together all the elements that I just mentioned in my talks: facts, authentic data, everything can be studied, compiled by scholars, and detailed information about each artwork can actually be made available, ensuring its collective place in art history. Now, printed catalogs are extremely expensive to produce and almost near impossible to update. Those of you who have undertaken a book project know this. I find this model that is done by Getty Foundation's online scholarly catalog initiative that's helping museums to make a transition from printed volumes to multimedia web-based applications that are freely available to anyone with a computer, tablet, or a smartphone. Now, this project was launched in 2009 in partnership with the Getty Museum and 8 participating institutions, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Arthur and Freer Gallery of Art, the LACMA, the NGA in Washington, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Tate. They all came together. I urge you to go online and check it. It is absolutely mind-blowing how scholars and professionals who are world-class have come together to look at one single artistic theme. It could be a painter, it could be a theme, or it could be a subject. And they've brought together these catalogs, which I think will be the way forward for scholarly collaboration. And I didn't speak about these. These are, again, some examples of online collaborative models. Together with the listing model, and then, of course, the scholarship model, you begin to build the foundation of how we can actually enjoy our artwork without being constantly plagued about who's going to steal the image, who's going to, try and copy it, and so on. And so with that, I bring my talk to a close. Ravi Varma, Raja Ravi Varma is iconic for all his pervasive influence on popular aesthetics in India. through the late 19th and early 20th century. And for this, he has been recognized as a master artist. With his penchant for idealized Indian beauty and incredible focus on detail of Indian costume, jewelry, and themes, his art became the regarded epitome of male and female perfection in human form. Today, we live with this gift, from modern day throwbacks where his paintings continue to play muse to photography or to inspiring newer generation. His is the legend that endures. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepti. If you could just turn the screen share off, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So it's a new subject for us. We've conducted several talks over the last 3 months, but very, very interesting, very new material and very new thought processes that you've put out today, leaving a lot of us who work in the space alongside you thinking of what we should actually do moving forwards from. So just a quick heads up to the audience. If you have any questions, Facebook Live, as well as those of you who are on the Zoom platform with us, please post them. I will be fielding the questions on the Zoom platform, and Mrs. Maini will pull up the questions that are on Facebook Live, and we'll try and get as many of them answered by Deepti as we can now. So let me open the Q&A session with a question from our founder trustee, Mr. J. Varma, who is also the great-great-great-grandson of Raja Ravi Varma and a superlative artist in his own right, who's following the portrait legacy of Ravi Varma, painters some incredible portraits. So he has probably the question that I would have posed myself if I was to ask you one. What would you recommend that the Ravi Varma Heritage Foundation do with respect to cataloging RRV's paintings?
I'm sure you already have a catalog, which would be basically, bits of information that have come upon as you continue looking at paintings and continue collaborating with people who own other paintings. My first suggestion would be to find a standard to follow. So there are a couple of them out there, and I always stress on standardization, and this is standardization to organize your data, because it's only if information is organized that it speaks to each other. So if your organization of information that you have on various works, say, let's imagine there are 30 works of art, is organized, that information can then speak with another international organization or government organization. There are basic standards of museum data organization that we have. And in any case, as a kind of a template to move forward where you are organizing all the data, perhaps have someday a catalog raisonné of all the artworks, it's imperative to have a accepted, both for you as well as internationally, a standard into which you begin organizing your information. So that's the first thing. Second, if possible, invest in technology. Cloud-based technologies where you enter online information or inventories are really affordable now. They are as little as a couple of $100 a month, and it's quite affordable, and it helps anyone working on the project or in your team access it. So these are the first baby steps, and everything that you do, and share. There will be, smaller organizations that could also perhaps chip in, students of museology, conservation, who can help you document, catalog, looking for internships and so on. And as step 2, I think you should find ways to collaborate with the government, because they too are looking for, public-private partnership is all the buzzword. So they're looking for meaningful collaborations where citizens are taking the lead. So that's something, of course, that you have to look at. It has been done. I think you've also done it, right, with the NGMA and so on. So that can always be stepped up.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. I see that I have a few, 4 questions actually that have come in from Shweta Bhatt Shah. She says she works with the Detroit Institute of Arts, and she has some questions. Shweta, please feel free to go ahead and post them here. I'll make sure I field your questions to Deepti. Moving on, there is one interesting question that has come in from Jani Nair, who asks, how do we make sure that mishaps such as that of what has happened to the Immaculate Conception be avoided?
With the best of precautions, sometimes mishaps happen, but uh, I mean, that was lamentable. I think the only answer I would say is that have professional, be careful with the professionals that you work with, and have professional safeguards. There are ways in which it can be done. Basically you have two teams, you have to document the process that you're going to carry out, whether it is in the restoration of a work of art or whether it is in the storage or the movement of a work of art. Typically, professional conservators, all of my colleagues are not they were not going to sit in front of the easel and then look at it and say, okay, now where shall I begin? It looks that way, but it is not. There is a meticulous process which I've been very privileged and privy to, where it is time and resources permitting, where it is photographed, it is documented. Like I showed you, they sit and discuss what are the problems. There is a sense of always an anticipation of what is wrong even before they get going on the actual object. And I think that's what true professionalism brings. So yes, it can be avoided as long as you plan the plan. It's as simple as that.
By your estimation, how many qualified restorers do we actually have in India?
Very many, actually. If you ask me for a number, senior conservators, it's less because it's a chicken and egg situation. If you have work, you would have more professionals, and vice versa. But senior professionals, I would imagine there are around 25 to 30, very senior, those who can both manage a conservation project as well as execute it themselves across materials and mediums. And then at the next level, you have junior conservators. In fact, the Tata Trust has just launched this fantastic art conservation program that is skilling younger conservators across the country. I think they have 6 nodal centers across the country. So we will have in another 2-3 years, we will have conservators in every city, both junior and senior. If you look for them, they are there.
That's actually heartening to know. Very heartening. Another interesting question that's been put up by Mr. Srinivas Murthy from the Architecture and Design Foundation, who asks, considering each master artist has many creative works, are there any standard formats to establish the value of each artwork? And who would decide that? The owner or a committee or a group of experts?
There is nobody, none of the above. As you know, in artworks, there is no benchmark on determining what work of art is worth how much. But that said, there are very basic determinants. Some of them which I've listed is the available quality of documentation, including provenance, which basically means where a work of art has come from, where it has lived all these years. The second is its actual health, which is what I spoke about, the conservation health. No matter how beautiful a work of art is, its quality and its fragility will always determine its value and its state of deterioration should that come into a perspective. The available level of scholarship and the kind of connections that can be made that have been documented by scholars who it might seem work in mysterious ways, but it's a lot of hard work, researching up a painting, finding where it's come from, collaborating. All these basic information come together to determine a basic value of each artwork. Is there a standard format to establish the value? Yes, there is a checklist, which is quite freely available on the things you should look for. But what actually determines the value of an artwork, the sky is the limit. It really is, and you've seen that in auction houses. When someone wants it, then they want it.
Absolutely. Another question which we've been asked several times over, but I'd love your opinion on this. Pramila Das asks, I see a lot of Raja Ravi Verma paintings being copied and sold in art events in India. Is this even ethical?
It is. I think it has always, I don't know if it is ethical. it is unethical if it is being tried, if someone's trying to pass it off as an original. Let me put it that way. If somebody makes, and that then you are firmly in the zone of making a forgery and trying to sell it off as a fake, which happens, of course. If you're a master artist, the chance of making a profit by taking that chance is so high that that is why there's a whole market out there. But that said, in art schools across the country, in schools across the world, copying is it's how you get inspired. You find something, all school children copy works of Van Gogh and so on. The great masters, Picasso himself, began his career copying works in the Prado. So it isn't unethical, not by any means. It's unethical if you're trying to sell it off as an original. The whole idea of beautiful works of art is to inspire. So I think
and I think every art student worth his salt at some time or the other in India has tried to recreate it.
Absolutely. It's also your way of measuring up how much do I come,
exactly.
up to that standard.
Yes. Yeah. Another question by this person who attends all of our webinars, calls himself anonymous attendee, doesn't choose to give us his name, but says that you mentioned that all prints/copies must be considered the same. And as a collector of Ravi Varma's oleographs, he has come across certain prints which were printed in the present decade, which are sold as oleographs printed at the Ravi Varma press. Are these then considered fake?
Absolutely. It's a fake. It's what I just explained. If you are trying to take a 1910 print and you're going to great lengths to pass it off as 1910, but it's printed now, which absolutely crumbles under the microscope of a conservator, because there's no way you can replicate something that was printed in 1910 in 2020. If nothing else, age has some benefits, which shows up again under a microscope. So yeah, it's a fake.
Actually, the print question is something that keeps popping up in people's mind again and again, because like you rightly pointed out, these prints are something that we've all grown up looking at. And each one who has one in their house feels they're holding a treasure which is really, really worth them.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than how when we go to see a museum abroad and you pick up prints that are copies. You can get a copy like a postcard, which is maybe $1. You can also get a copy that is $50, or you can get a copy that is like really high-end art print. But nowhere do they make the claim that it's an original. Yeah. And like I said, I think the borderline of ethics it simply boils down to how it is being sold as such. So if you go into an antique shop and they show you that it's a Ravi Varma from whatever, but it's new, then it's a fake. And that's a whole other talk that you can do.
We've come across several that, that have this old ancient look from the front, but take it off that broken wooden frame and you'll see shiny glossy paper behind.
It's just flip it.
Absolutely. The word is flip it.
I think the nicest time is to spend time with a conservator in a studio. It's great fun, the tricks they'll teach you.
Jamila Begum has an interesting point to make here, probably because I think maybe she knows you're from Kerala, state close to your heart. Do you think that a studio with all originals and prints could be brought together by Kerala government if possible? If so, I strongly suggest that you send a proposal to the cultural secretary.
Okay, I know various agencies in this question. So the answer is yes, it can be. But whether it could be is they already have the Sri Chitra Art Gallery. So I think whatever they want to do, they can already do. They're sitting with 40 odd of the best paintings that he produced. They can certainly borrow or bring together a special exhibition, which is the whole purpose of a special exhibition, where they can bring together with the stuff they already have. It's one of the largest collections by a single entity that they are already sitting on top of. And if they could augment it with, the paraphernalia and the creation of a thing, certainly it could be done. And yes, I will send a proposal. You could send a proposal.
Anybody can send them a proposal. We just hope they'll read those emails or letters that they get from us.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Anjali Jain has another question. Has there been any initiative yet to change or modify the government tendering process for art conservation in India?
No.
Would you care to elaborate a little bit on this process so the listeners can actually understand it a little better for those
I think it comes like everything else. I think the change has to come from without rather than within, because it's an established process. It's easy for them. I also understand their point of view. To give out huge sums of money without explanation is cumbersome and difficult to justify, especially for something as, you know, in light of other pressing concerns, resuscitating a 200 or 400-year-old painting, right? You spend crores of rupees. So that's difficult to always justify. But I think if we could have, like I said, documentation or scholarship available that puts forth the case for something that needs to be done in a proper way, and if the government needs to spend, I mean, there are exceptions, of course. In specialized areas where there is nobody else, the government does hire specialists who can get the job done. But it's just that this has never come into that discussion forum at all. And it will come, I think, if, like I said at the beginning of it, there's something that all of us can do, and it is to start these conversations.
So I think, Anjali, that answers the second question that you've posed, because she did pose a question soon after I asked hers to you. Mm-hmm. What would such an initiative require? How can we help for things to change for the better?
Absolutely. Liaise with your local museum, liaise with any arts organization that has works of arts that you admire. It could be in your city, it could be somewhere far away. Get to know a conservator, get to know a museologist. We all work at the bottom of the pile. But we are nice people, so
I think also what we notice, like you might have noticed a lot in your work, people don't interact here. It's all very static and one way. They expect the interaction to happen from the other side, because you, me, others who work in this field are supposedly the custodians of this legacy, but that ownership or that, you know, sense of belonging and responsibility is yet to come on a large level.
Yeah. And nothing prevents you from doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because like I said, it's a collective legacy, not just Ravi Verma, but all of our, I mean, to the audience listening, I would ask you, who are the 9 masters of India? You know, and I don't, I'm not being dismissive, but except for those who work in the field, I don't think the citizens know who the 9 masters are, and that these are the works of art. These are the artists who've been regarded as the government, by the government of India, by our elected representatives, as the nation's treasures. So if our quality, and our children in schools are taught works of art by, you know, every child's school will speak to you about Impressionism and Cubism, and they all know who Picasso is and Monet is and Manet is, but ask them to, I'm not talking about, you know, all schools, but I'm saying for the majority of the prescribed syllabus, we don't thread it all the way down. So yes. My friend Giri is just pointing, if I could just say, saying there has been at least one attempt made, and the government agency is looking at. Giri, I know what you're talking about, but we'll discuss it when it happens. So,
that was actually an interesting point that I wanted to bring out. Someone also has another very smart suggestion. I wish we could do something like that. I think to popularize, why don't you offer packs of 3 to 5 paintings for the common man?
I don't even understand the question. I mean, they are yours, to whoever is saying that. They are yours. You can walk into a public museums. They are looked after by public taxpayers' money. And in the case of Ravi Verma, unfortunately, the paintings I don't think can fit in the home of a common man. But the paintings are there for all of you to enjoy. Again, a question to all of them is, when was the last time you went to an art gallery?
Exactly. Another question by anonymous attendee again, who seems to be very active today. What do you think of Google Arts and Culture as a platform for Ravi Verma?
It's fantastic, though I do think that we should have something that is our own, which is some of the examples that I showed you. Google is arts and culture is fantastic, but I would really like a platform that is multilingual and multicultural pertaining to India. You know, there are particular nuances that we in India documenting objects face. To give a simple example, um, we have vernacular names and terms for a lot of the objects, and it's important to call them by what they are. So that doesn't happen. So I think we need our, I love Google. They are the only ones that are available.
Anita Dumra asks you, who are the 9 Indian masters? Obviously, just for information's sake.
Yeah, I will think so. There is Jamini Roy, there is Abindranath Tagore, there is Raja Ravi Varma, Mukherjee, then yeah, so that's all I can recall. Wait, it'll come back to me. I have a acronym for them, so it'll just come back to me.
How interesting.
Yeah, to remember it.
So Shweta Bhatt, whom I requested earlier to pose some questions, has actually posed a couple of questions, but I think I'll take them with you privately, Deepti, because she's initiating a project on Indian art in North American museums. And Ravi Varma's work is one of her first projects. So she has a few questions and, you know, some other information, but I think I'll take that offline with you later.
Okay.
We can address them on the platform now.
Mm.
A few more questions that are floating in now. Priya Dev says, Haldankar and Mukundan Thampi's art is passed off as Ravi Varma's artwork. Why does something like this happen?
Okay, probably because it's not documented and whoever is in charge has not looked at it. I mean, it might have been, I don't know what she means, whether it is displayed as such in a gallery or whether it has been misdocumented.
No, I think she's referring more commonly to the misnomer or the misperception that people have of Haldankar's Lady with the Lamp being something that was painted by Ravi Varma.
Okay.
I think that's lack of knowledge than anything.
Lack of knowledge, I suppose. I mean, it's like the, yeah, so, yeah, probably lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge, yeah.
And then also sometimes it gets misattributed. That's the term I was looking for. And then it goes into a loop where one goes into the other, and then it just goes into, you know.
Absolutely. I think that's about it for the questions. If anyone has any more questions, please do post them right now, because I think I've addressed most of the questions. 30 questions have come in. I've addressed most of them. I've left out a few because some are compliments and, you know, comments. A lot of people have been very complimentary of the session that you conducted, saying that it's been very informative and that, you know, it's shown them new things that they've never known of before. Anonymous attendee, you're posing another question. Does the foundation own any original Ravi Varma paintings? I think we've shouted this from the rooftops. No, we do not. We are not holding any artworks of Ravi Varma. We are just custodians of his legacy, and we work in the space of research and documentation to do exactly that. We do not buy, sell.
I just also remembered as you were speaking that that you don't own any things. The government of India, when I was a student in the National Museum, had initiated, I don't know what happened of that project, had initiated a project called the Navratna, literally the 9 masters. And they had put together a inventory of all the 9 masters, where we as students, groups of us as students, had gone off to the 9 masters residences. So Raja Ravi Varma was there. A team went to Trivandrum to the Sri Chitra Art Gallery. One team, again, from Bangalore, I remembered another name, Nicholas Roerich was there. So a team came to Nicholas Roerich. So Bangalore actually has 2 masters to its credit. Another team went off to Bengal for Abindranath. The 3 brothers, Abindranath, Rabindranath, Gagendranath. So that's 5 of them. Then Mukherjee, of course, I mentioned. I don't know what the criteria was when there were things. And of course, I mentioned Amrita Shergill and things. So Amrita Shergill is another one. So like I said that, how many am I missing now? I think I've got 8. Somebody, one more person I'm missing. Nandalal Bose, so and now that I'm thinking of the project, when you have the works in your head, the names come back. But like I said, it was under NIC, which is the National Informatics Center, I think. And there was a database created, but then after that, I don't know what happened of it. I searched even for this talk. I looked in the Ministry of Culture. So if anybody is able to help me with what happened to that project, that would be fantastic. But I've never heard of it after. The 9 masters deemed as masters, an attempt was made by the government. And now this is 2003, 4, 2, 3, around that time.
Long time ago.
That might be something to put out there in case someone else knows.
Absolutely. So yes, I think there's a lot of compliments that are coming in. People are complimenting the way you planned your talk and the number of the kind of information that you've actually put out. There's somebody who says, Subramanian, who says, I think being a retired government servant, it is difficult to get away from the tendering process.
I understand.
So
I understand. But because that's the only way you've looked at it, so perhaps it's time to look at other models.
Yes, Chandrasekhar Nair says it'll be useful to introduce Ravi Verma to young kids and, kind of bring them into the culture of visiting galleries. Another very regular person who attends our talks, Chinar Balsaraf, says, thank you for the sessions, very new material and topic. So yes, I think Pramila Das once again says, this is not a question, just that I've seen the Jagan Mohan Gallery in Mysore and the whole floor has Raja Ravi Verma paintings, which also house a very famous Woman with a Lamp by Haldankar. So many mistake this painting for Raja Ravi Verma. I'm an artist too based in Bangalore, and in our circles, this has been discussed a lot. Okay, thank you for clarifying that, ma'am. Shweta Bhatt, I will take your questions offline with Deepti. She has one question here though. Do you think John Fernandez is a famous artist too?
I am not familiar with
John. Yeah, neither am I. Maybe if you could elaborate a little more, we can, rack our brains there. But yes, that's it, Deepti. So it's been a very, very engaging and informative session for us. Like I said at the very beginning, a lot of new material that you have thrown light on that our listeners and viewers have not had access to before. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the work you do in this that we all work in. It is highly appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very warm thank you to the whole team, tech team. Gitanjali, thank you. I think you're listening in, and of course to all the board members, trustees. Thank you all so much for this evening.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all the academicians. I can see many people who've logged in today. Dr. Usha Balakrishnan is here. Her brother Bharat Ramamrutam has joined in.
Oh, lovely. These are the people who you have to...
Absolutely. I can see Manda Hingurao has logged in from Raja Fateh Singh Museum. So lots of known people on the listening panel here. So thank you so much to everyone. And Geeta, you're back on screen.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, Deepti, for a rather interesting session. We're trying to cover all the sort of elements that go into preserving masterpieces and a legacy, more importantly. And I think this served as a very important part of that whole puzzle that we're trying to put together. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us. And we look forward to sort of doing more work with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Bye.
Good night. All our attendees here and on Facebook, thank you for your continued support. And we look forward to your attendance again. More events are being planned, and we'll put out the schedule as we do via email, via your WhatsApp communication, Facebook, or Instagram. So do keep following us. Events are posted there periodically, and it'd be nice to have as much as we can do with, now that we're all in the extended phases of lockdown, to get as much as information out there. This would be a good time. So thank you, good night, and a happy weekend to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.